The Central Division is all in right now, and the Winnipeg Jets have to be too. They must smash this trade deadline out of the park if we're looking at all of these other teams loading up for what should be a very hotly contested week. We'll dive into all of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we've got a lot to talk about. I'm recording this probably a little earlier than I should, to be honest, but there's just been so much happening over the last 2.5 hours that I feel like, you know what, might as well. The entire NHL trade deadline window has completely shifted. Everything is in motion. And if there's one takeaway that you can glean from the first, I would say, couple of hours of this Wednesday, it's that the Central Division is all in at this trade deadline. Everyone seemingly is loading up. The only teams that haven't really moved yet are St. Louis and Nashville. And, you know, given that they're more fringe playoff candidates, I think you can understand why. But some of the top teams, Colorado, Dallas, they've been making moves, and it's now up to Winnipeg to respond. The Jets have to have an absolute smashing home run success of a trade deadline. There's no real option for them anymore because sitting back with your hands behind your back and sort of calling the Sean Monahan deal your main thing, it can't be it. And I don't think it is. I think the Jets have something up their sleeve, although it's really hard to tell what it's going to be because a lot of the trade deadline targets that I've identified over the past few weeks, well, a lot of them are getting snatched up. We just saw yesterday there was a surprising deal while I was at the gym, of course. So I caught it afterwards. Anthony Mantha is going to the Vegas Golden Knights for a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick, and he is having about half of his contract retained. So Mantha, for me, was one of my top deadline targets as a really quality middle six winger. I thought he would have been in Winnipeg's price range because, like, right now the Jets, in terms of like draft capital, they don't have a lot. They have a couple of better pieces. I would say that Montreal second is really good, and the Jets probably can use that on a nice player. But maybe, just maybe, Mantha, wasn't as like high end as they could possibly get with some of the prospects and picks that they've still got. So in that respect, it's a bit disappointing. I thought Mantha would have been a player that would fit the Jets very well. And I actually thought that, for what Bones wants, it would have made a lot of sense. But, overall, right, it helps Vegas get better, but it maybe doesn't move the needle at the level that they're going to need, especially if Stone misses the postseason, which seems like it's actually a pretty real possibility. Mark has like I believe some sort of spleen injury or spleen hemorrhaging, or it was like a spleen laceration, pretty serious stuff. I know people make jokes about Vegas and their LTIR shenanigans, but it sounds like this is pretty serious. So obviously we're hoping for him to get better really quickly. That's a nasty injury. And Mantha's going to have some pretty big shoes to fill, but he's not going to be that level of player, right? So Vegas, I guess you could say got better, but maybe didn't move the needle. Teams that have moved the needle, though, starting today, holy cow, everything kicked off, and Colorado is really swinging for it. They've acquired Sean Walker and turned Bowen Byram into Casey Mittelstadt, which is pretty crazy, right? They had to ship out some stuff. There's like a conditional first-round pick going to Philadelphia. They also sent Ryan Johansson and like one or two other smaller pieces. And, Johansson, of course, the Flyers waived. That's not super shocking, I guess, because Torts and Johansson didn't exactly have the best relationship the last time they worked together. But for, what the Avs are looking for, right? So Walker is a really nice middle pairing player. I think a guy who will very capably fit into their right side, probably on the third pairing or even maybe their second pairing. And he was one of the guys that I thought would have been a nice upgrade over like Nate Schmidt or Neil Pionk. Now, obviously, Pionk isn't really going to be a player who's going to get demoted. So in this case, he'd probably be benching Nate Schmidt. But it is what it is. I'm not so worried about Walker going there. A first was probably too rich for Winnipeg's blood, and if the Jets would have to give up one of their top prospects, I'd rather it be for a better player. Now, the Mittelstadt flip is a little more interesting, right? Bowen Byram is a very talented blue liner who maybe hasn't exactly aced it for the Avs in the way that I think they were expecting, and getting a Mittelstadt, for your second line makes perfect sense. I think, Colorado was looking for a really good top six center who could slide in behind McKinnon and ease some of that burden so he's not having to play, McDavid's 40 minutes a night. I got to say, Casey, he's a good bit of business. I think he'll fit in very well there. He's a smart player with good scoring instincts and has had a career season. So for the Jets, this is probably not the best news. Colorado getting better when they're already very good is not ideal. I got to say, a better defense, better forward grouping. The only real, I guess, downside for that team is probably the goaltending, right? That I think is a bit of a question mark. I mean, Georgiev and company can probably do a decent enough job, but maybe not at the level that you would expect of a true top-end elite netminder. So generally speaking, Colorado going to be a very tough out. If you had to choose between them and Dallas, though, you'd probably still want to face the Avs. Dallas looks very scary. Obviously, Tanev has probably been their biggest ad, although it sounds like they're still exploring trade market options. I don't quite know who they would be able to afford and bring in, but Logan Stankoven, I think, is going to be one of their biggest additions, and he's an internal player, right? A great, super shifty, small, undersized scorer who's already proven that his size is not a problem. I think he's great evidence of why I always say being bigger isn't always better. Stankoven's super shifty, elusive. He's already embarrassed the Jets on a couple of shifts, and it seems like he's going to keep doing this for a long time. So, for Winnipeg, I think we're now seeing, what I've talked about, the Jets needing to be all in this season. They can't sit back and let other teams improve while they make one or two moves and say that that's enough. And I'm not saying that Monahan's trade was, a low-level thing. It was pretty big, right? Sean has panned out really well. He's been a great addition. He was actually unlucky not to score in yesterday's game against the Kraken, and he's fit, nicely alongside Ehlers and Iafallo or whoever else ends up getting up on that second line, depending on the day. Obviously, it changes quite frequently. But, for the Jets, I think Winnipeg really needs to swing big here. They can't afford to sit back and let these teams improve while, their own window is very narrow at this point. The Jets only have a couple of seasons left with all of these guys under contract, and there's no guarantee that Hellebuyck is going to be able to replicate his level of success that he's currently experiencing the way he's done in previous years. So in the following season. So this has to be the season. I think the Jets really need to be willing to chase after a big fish. And honestly, there's actually quite a few names out there that I'm still very interested in and that I think the Jets could potentially swing for. We'll talk about which of these guys Winnipeg should really prioritize and which names are off the market. Obviously, we didn't get a chance yet to talk about the Adam Henrique deal, in part because Henrique isn't really a target anymore. He's a center, and I think Monahan probably has now filled that role anyways, but he's, off to another squad. So for the Jets, right, really they're looking for a winger, most likely, and a D, like a depth blue liner. But in terms of wings, there's a lot of choices and some really surprising ones out there that the Jets could probably go for. We'll get to who I'd really focus on in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. We're past the halfway point of the season. Obviously, we're at trade deadline time, and regardless of where the Jets are in the standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. For those of you who are big stats nerds and love, tracking all of the intimate player numbers, whether it's goals, assists, save percentage, all that fun stuff. Sleeper does the same thing, and they've also got projections for every game, whether it's more or less. If you can beat those projections, you have a chance to win big, right? You get 8 of these categories correct for a given game for a player. Guess what? you could win 100 times your bet. That's 100 times your bet with Sleeper. And, obviously for those of you who love tracking McDavid, Ehlers, Scheifele, Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, Kucherov, all of these top elite stars, maybe even some of the fading ones like Crosby and Ovechkin, who are still really good, this is a chance for you to really put your knowledge to the test. I think it's a great opportunity for you to win big. And again, all you have to do is get in with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL when you're signing up, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. While we're here, I also wanted to shout out our friends and partners at Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with the 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees do apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member of SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on today's episode as we are obviously trying to, come off the shell shock of the last several hours of trade deadline action. It's been really crazy. And holy mercy, a lot's happening, and the Jets have not yet been involved in anything as of right now. That is subject to change later this afternoon or evening. And apparently Sean Reynolds from TSN has actually suggested yesterday that there may be a Jets trade today, which, given how fast the market is moving and how quickly things are changing, wouldn't surprise me, but we'll see. We'll talk about that in just a moment and who I think Winnipeg might really be interested in. But before we go too much ahead of ourselves, just wanted to shout out something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And we're also now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you all day, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. And now back to discussing Winnipeg's trade deadline. Obviously, this year, I think more than any other season, feels like a year in which the Jets have this Paul Stastny-esque vibe, right? You remember a couple of years ago when Stastny was basically a surprise trade almost out of left field. The Jets were in on Brassard. They were looking for a top six center, and Brassard looked to be the one that would fit the bill, and then that completely collapsed thanks to Vegas trying to sort of pull the floor out from under us and steal away our best center option. Instead, the Jets just happened to trade for an even better player and a guy who stuck around for a few years in Stastny. I feel like all of the market conditions, with prices not actually being super, super high, and all of these teams going after targets that I had initially suggested would be good fits for the Jets, well, this might be a great chance for the Jets to pull something out from underneath the hat, a really big surprise, and kind of do another Paul Stastny deal. Now, in terms of who's out there still, quite a few forwards actually would fit what the Jets need. I've thought about Yegor Sharangovich from the Calgary Flames, and then there's Tomas Tatar, and of course Jordan Eberle out of Seattle. Travis Konechny is technically still available, I guess, although I think he's probably going to stick around the Flyers a bit. It seems like Philadelphia might be trying to buy. They might be interested in Jacob Chychrun, which would be very interesting. Chychrun going to Philadelphia after they moved out Walker would certainly change the landscape for that team pretty aggressively and accelerate their timeline. But in terms of forwards, right, the big name that I think the Jets still have to really be in on is Pavel Buchnevich. Buchnevich obviously has a modified no trade clause, and he has some term on his deal another year after this one. So his price tag is going to be pretty expensive. And more interestingly, The Blues have suggested they're willing to eat up to 50% of his contract if it gives them an even bigger trade haul. If that's the case, the Jets really have no excuse not to go big time on this deal. Buchnevich is one of those guys who's a game-breaking presence and scorer. You saw him against the Jets the past couple of weeks. He's been a menace his whole career, one of the most skilled players in St. Louis, and he would honestly reshape the entire top six landscape for Winnipeg's forward grouping, right? This is a guy who I think, if you're going to sink all of your assets into one big deal, somebody who's more than just a simple rental, I think this is the kind of deal that you would go after. And given what the trade market has been this week, I'm starting to think that maybe the Jets could do a pretty good package that maybe doesn't touch McGroarty or Salamanson or maybe even Lambert. Now, I'm not going to say I wouldn't be willing to move Lambert. I would just say it would be probably less preferable for me to have that happen. I'm personally a big fan of Lambert. I think Brad has a lot of potential to become a stud forward for the Jets, but at the end of the day, right, Winnipeg's window is now not in 6 years. That core will be fun, I'm sure, but if the Jets want to win with Hellebuyck and net right now, they have got to be willing to put some of their bigger trade chips into play, and I think Buchnevich, for me, is a guy that I'd be willing to accept losing a top prospect or two for. Now, in terms of what I think you could have going back to St. Louis, obviously a first rounder next year would probably make sense. Maybe this year's second rounder that we're holding on to, and then, a Barlow or Lambert sort of player, and probably, I don't know, a forward of some sort. Maybe Iafallo goes back the other way, maybe Kupari or something. I really don't know in terms of what sort of roster player they'd be asking for. Kupari is kind of like a toss-in, right? So probably somebody a little bit more, I don't know, experienced, or at least with a little bit more of a scoring record, because the Blues themselves are still going to feel like they're in contention. I know I've mentioned Mason Appleton perhaps being a good fit here, but I'm pretty sure the Jets are going to do everything they want to, or everything they can to keep Appleton. They really seem to love him. Bones will probably put a lock and key on his locker stall so they can't remove any of his stuff. That's my guess, right? But in terms of what the trade package would look like, I'd be willing to give up a pretty sizable package, especially if you have that retained salary. That retention would be a game changer for the Jets, and it would also allow them to make other moves and kind of work around a limited amount of space. Maybe it means they can, not have to worry so much about moving out a big salary piece just yet. They can move out maybe a smaller piece that clears off just enough room for Buchnevich, and then still look to add one more piece on top of that. That, I think, would be the most preferable outcome. In terms of other blue liners out there who might be able to be fished out for, Winnipeg's back end, TVR still makes a lot of sense for me. I sort of wonder if Ethan Bear would be able to improve his season with the Jets. He's had a pretty miserable start to his Caps life, but maybe, for cheap, right? If you toss them a fourth rounder or something, maybe Bear would fit in with Winnipeg a lot better. I don't know. Tough to say. Maybe not worth the gamble. He's still got a decent sized cap hit at $2.5 million. So not exactly something that I'm jumping for joy at the idea of, but it's a possibility, right? There's lots of options. Out of left field, I kind of wonder if Noah Hanifin would be a player the Jets might target. Now, Hanifin has a modified no-trade clause, and it sounds like his agents have kind of hijacked the process, so that might be a lot more difficult to get done. But if Hanifin would come to Winnipeg, that's another really big target that I probably wouldn't be as interested in giving up heaven and earth for, but certainly, a sizable trade package on top of maybe adding a forward, like perhaps you could squeeze out Blake Coleman or something if you add in some quality players or prospects, or maybe even, like I said, Sharon Govich, package deal. Hey, keep your options open, especially because it seems like everyone else is loading up, and the Jets really can't afford to sit still with just how much quality the Central continues to add. So a lot of things in play, a lot of stuff to consider. And if the Jets make a major move today, I'll probably post up a YouTube short of some sort so that at least we get some instant reactions. And then anything they do, I'll talk about on tomorrow's episode. But of course, the Jets did play last night. I saved this part for last because it's not that exciting. And, obviously the Jets lost, right? But I'll talk about some good things, some really interesting takeaways, because there was one in particular that I think stood out, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot at greatness. And giving your team the best shot at winning is often by, recruiting more MVPs. And you can do the same for your business with Indeed. A lot of you are probably, especially if you're like business owners, you're looking for quality candidates. You need to find somebody who can really fit your team and turn in an all-star performance. That's why if you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Indeed is also one of the only job sites out there where you're guaranteed to find quality applicants that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't have to pay a dime. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you just need one powerful hiring partner who can do all of it for you and help you do everything from do virtual interviews to filling out assessments, doing all of that stuff in one spot. It's really convenient. And of course, Indeed is also known for their instant matching service, which can get you high quality applicants almost immediately. As somebody who personally has used Indeed when I was looking for work, I can personally attest to the fact that it was very convenient, very straightforward. Filling out applications was very straightforward, and Indeed made it as simple as possible. So if you're a business owner or employer looking for new quality applicants and somebody who can really boost your team, this is a great chance to get in on a special offer that we have for our listeners. Start hiring right now, because with a $75 sponsored job credit, you can upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer is valid through March 31st. Again, just go to Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions do apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are just wrapping up some coverage from yesterday's game. Obviously, the ending of that wasn't ideal. The Jets lost 4-3 after controlling most of the game against the Kraken. Bit of a frustrating loss, right? For once, Connor Hellebuyck actually looked a little mortal. I think the game-winning goal against on the PK, he's probably going to really be upset with himself on. But, given how much Hellebuyck has really bailed this team out and quite frankly saved them in a number of recent games, you just can't be mad at it, right? Like, he's going to have one or two games, probably more than one or two, the next few weeks where he's not, Superman in net, right? He's going to have to concede and lose a couple of games here, and that's fine. I think I'm more annoyed by the fact that, again, we saw Ehlers not on the first line, and we saw a top line that was mostly invisible, right? And when it was visible, obviously there was a nice Kyle Connor goal, but it just feels like that whole trio of Connor, Scheifele, and Nemesnikov doesn't really gel all that well. It's not like as bad as the Velarde combo, right? That trio was definitely the worst we've seen this year. Connor, Scheifele, and Nemesnikov at least looked more capable, but I would still say you need somebody with more high-end talent on that right wing side. And I know that Bones will make 50 different excuses as to why he doesn't want Ehlers up there. But, unless the Jets make a big trade, there's just no one else who can really fill that role that's not named Nick. And I hate to say it, but Ehlers is probably one of the few guys who can actually make Connor and Scheifele work better. When you have Ehlers become the zone entry specialist and the guy who really ferries the puck in between zones and inside the offensive zone, it allows Scheifele and Connor to become so much more effective at scoring and finding those soft spaces. When they have to do it on their own, it's a lot less of a pretty sight. And I think that has been a consistent theme throughout their entire careers, especially when they're united. So bit of a frustration there, but otherwise, the Jets looked pretty all right. The fourth line was the only one that really got outplayed badly. I think David Gustafson's just not really been anywhere near himself the past couple of games that he's come back. He still looks super rusty, not super surprised. And even when he was healthy, if we're being honest, he wasn't like the game-breaking presence in that depth role that I think, a lot of us were hoping him to be. I feel like if he played with more higher-end skill, there'd be something more there, but he has a really tough road to actually prove that he can do that. So unfortunate for him that he's not going to get a chance most likely, but it is what it is. In terms of the most impressive performance on the night, that's going to come out from the third line. The Lowry line was everywhere. They were absolutely dominating control of the game. They were the most effective offensive unit. They had a couple of points, including a great game-tying goal from Adam Lowry. So overall, just stuff that you love to see. That line hasn't exactly been going as often, the past few months, but the last several games, they've started to turn things around again, and they look a lot more effective. There's been a couple of games where they got outplayed pretty badly, but for the most part, it seems like they've gotten back on track. Niederreiter's finding the back of the net more often, and that is all good news because, like, Nino is one of our guys who we really need to unfortunately finish more opportunities. As effective as he can be, one of the big things that he offers is tertiary scoring presence. And when he's not doing that, the Jets offense in the bottom six can lag a little bit. So good to see him back to his scoring ways. He's obviously one of my favorite additions Chevy has made over the past couple of seasons. And I think he has fit in beautifully alongside Lowry to the point where I actually really do think he needs more ice time and could honestly get a promotion into the top six. For some reason, he's one of the only players the Jets haven't tried somewhere in those top lines. I don't know why that is. I feel like it's actually not making the most of his skill sets by keeping him on the third line. But hey, the third line does actually play as much as the second line, so I get it in a sense, but it would be nice to see him be given a chance to maybe earn a bigger role. Now, Velarde is potentially coming back sometimes this week. He did go back to Winnipeg the other day to get evaluated for his upper body injury. We still don't really know what's happening with that. And I don't know if it's trade related in terms of the Jets trying to keep it quiet so that they can work out what they want to do with their wings. Obviously, they're not trading Velarde, but in terms of who they might be acquiring and targeting, they might want to, I don't know, be a little bit cagey and kind of keep things secret. So that might be part of it. A little bit of gamesmanship. Might also just be that Velarde's issue is a little bit more complicated and if he's slated to miss any sort of time, the Jets have to sort of game plan around that. So a lot to consider. But once he comes back, I would definitely not want him back on the first line. Like I said, I didn't love Connor Scheifele and Nemestikov, but I hated it a lot less than I did Connor Scheifele and Velarde. That trio definitely does not work. Even when they're scoring, still bad. So let's put Velarde on the second line and see what he can maybe do alongside Monahan and Ehlers. Those guys have been doing really well together, and Velarde might be able to make a little bit more use of that zone possession and stuff and convert some more goal line opportunities because we all know that he definitely is a crease merchant. But let me know what you're expecting out of him once he returns. Let me know how you would arrange these lines and what you think the Jets might be after in the trade market and who you're hoping they add over the next couple of days. With so many targets off the board, there's obviously not as many names out there that I'm excited about, but still some pretty good guys, and maybe the Jets have a big surprise for us in store. Drop your predictions for trades for the Jets in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, like I said, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Let's hope we have some actually good Jets coverage and trade news to announce on tomorrow's episode. But for now, that's all we have. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.